Hello everyone and welcome to another video. This video is going to be focusing on the Bradford based company, which was Jowett Cars Limited. Jowett was founded in 1901 by brothers Benjamin and William Jowett with Arthur V. Lamb. They started in the cycle business and went on to make V-twin engines for driving machinery. Some early engines found their way locally into other makes of cars as replacements. In 1904, they became the Jowett Motor Manufacturing Company based in Back Burlington Street, Bradford. Their first Jowett light car was produced in February 1906, but as their little workshop was fully occupied with general engineering activities, experiments with different engine configurations and making the first 6 Scott motorbikes, it did not go into production until 1910. And then after more than 25,000 miles of exhaustive trials. Their intention was to provide a low-weight vehicle at a low price and with low running costs. The prototype could be described as the United Kingdom's first real light car. Engine and gearbox were specifically designed for a light car and made largely of aluminium. Its low speed torque and gear ratios were ideally suited to the hills about Bradford and Yorkshire's terrain, where poor roads proved little use for a high top speed or quick acceleration. Construction of the engine and the rest of the car was robust, and the Jowett engine was designed and built for a light car. The production car quickly became popular. It used an 816cc flat twin water-cooled engine of 6.4 horsepower and a 3-speed gearbox with tiller steering. The body was a lightweight open 2-seater, and learning popular opinion was that the 10 horsepower was a minimum. Jowett advertised their third car as being 8 horsepower without changing the specification. 12 vehicles were made before an improved version with steering wheel was launched in 1913, and a further 36 were made before the outbreak of the First World War, when the factory was turned over to munitions manufacture. 2 tiller steers still survive today. Jowett Cars Limited was a new private company formed in June 1919 to make and sell motor cars, and it purchased the car manufacturing portion of the business carried on by the Jowett Motor Manufacturing Company. It became a public company listed on the London Stock Exchange in 1935. That year in 1919, a new worksite was bought at Springfield, Bradford, located in Idle, the site of a disused quarry. Car making started in a new factory in 1920. The first vehicle was the Jowett 7, using an enlarged version of the pre-war flat twin. First it was enlarged to 831cc, then to 907cc, and in 1921, when the claim to 8 horsepower was dropped from advertising. Thereafter, all Jowetts were 7s until the introduction of a 4-cylinder engine in 1936. The engine developed its maximum torque at low revs and was soon famed for its pulling power, reliability and economy. Commercial vehicles based on the car's chassis were also built in 1922 and became an increasingly important part of the company's output. Jowett first exhibited at the London Motor Show in 1921 and gradually broke out of their previous local market. In 1923, coil ignition and electric starting were added, and the 4-seater Long 4 was introduced in tourer form, priced at £245, followed in 1925 by a closed saloon model, the previous short chassis 2-seater continuing in production. In 1929, the engine received removable cylinder heads to ease maintenance, and braking was on all 4 wheels. The production was briefly suspended in September 1931 when fire swept through the works. In 1933, it saw the launch of the Jowett Kestrel, with a 4-speed gearbox, and in 1935 there was the oddly named Jowett Weasel Sports Tourer. The first 4-cylinder flat 4 car arrived in 1936 with the 1166cc twin carburettor Jowett 10, which continued until the outbreak of war along the traditional 2-cylinder models, which grew to 946cc in 1937. In 1935 the company went public, and in 1936 Benjamin Jowett retired. Brother William carried on until 1940. Production of cars stopped in 1940, but engine production for motor-generated sets continued alongside aircraft components and other military hardware. The engine was, besides being used as a generator set, also used in the Jowett engine-powered fire pump. The company was bought by property developer Charles Glaw in 1945, and he sold it in 1947 to the bankers Lazard Brothers. When production restarted after the Second World War, the twin-cylinder engine was dropped from the range of new cars, but continued in 1005cc form to the end of production in the commercial vehicles, now comprising of a light lorry, the Bradford van, 2 versions of an estate called the Utility, and chassis front ends and kits for outside coach builders, many abroad. The new cars were a complete change from what had gone before, with the streamlined Jowett Javelin designed by a team led by Gerald Palmer. This had such advanced features such as a flat 4 pushrod engine, independent front suspension with torsion bars front and rear, a unitary body construction. The car was good for 80 miles an hour and had excellent handling. In 1950, the Javelin was joined by the Jowett Jupiter sports car with a chassis designed by Ebrand von Eberhorst, who had worked for Auto Union. Javelins were designed for production levels never before attempted by Jowett. Javelin and Bradford body production was outsourced to Briggs Motor Bodies, who built a new plant at Doncaster. Briggs supplied the bodies fully trimmed and ready to be applied to the mechanicals. The Jupiters were always built in-house at Idle. The new mechanicals had teething problems, but Javelin bodies were still being mass-produced to the original schedule, leading to these being stockpiled. Export sales collapsed by 75% in 1952, followed by sluggish domestic sales, while the nation waited for the removal of a temporary increased purchase tax, finally eased in April 1953, with disastrous long-term consequences for Jowett. Poor business strategy and direction and overconfidence were the financially sound company's downfall, and either after the engine and gearbox problems were solved, the idle plant was never able to build, nor during 1952 was the distribution network able to sell the expected volume. Collapse of the arrangements for the supply of bodies led to suspension of Javelin production in 1953, together with the by now outdated Bradford, though tooling had been completed for new models. Jupiters remained in demand and were built up to the end of 1954. The company did not go broke, but sold its factory to International Harvester, who made tractors at the site until the early 1980s. The factory was demolished in 1983. Jowett switched to manufacturing aircraft parts for the Blackburn and General Aircraft Company in a former woolen mill at Howden Clough, Birdstall near Batley. Jowett, just a shell of the company, was later taken over by Blackburn in 1956. Although spares from post-war cars were kept available until 1963, when the remainder of the Jowett Company was closed due to the renationalisation of the aircraft industry. The purchase tax on new cars was reduced by 25% on the 15th of April 1953. which triggered a surge in demand for new cars in the UK market. In the resulting scramble for production facilities, Ford bought Briggs, whose new Doncaster plant built the unitary construction bodies and fully trimmed them for Jowett Javelin cars and Bradford vans. In April 1953, the Ford Motor Company Limited purchased from the US shareholders' majority control of Briggs Auto Bodies Limited, whose main factory was adjacent to the Ford plant at Dagenham. Remaining minority shareholders were bought out and Ford quickly acquired full ownership of the Briggs business. The Briggs factory at Doncaster was surplus to Ford's requirements, and it was sold to Fisher and Ludlow. Fisher and Ludlow itself was quickly swallowed up by the newly created British Motor Corporation. At the beginning of July, the chairman of Jowett Cars Limited, A.F. Joplin, who at the time was also a senior employee with Blackburn Aircraft, informed Jowett shareholders at their annual general meeting that difficulties had arisen over the future supply of car bodies. Negotiations were proceeding, but an interruption in the delivery of completed vehicles appeared likely to occur in the closing months of that year. He also reported that exports for 1952 were almost 75% down in 1951, which has earlier been mentioned. On the home market, during the 6-month run-up to tax changes in April 1953, the anticipated success of an organised campaign for a reduction in purchase tax had sharply reduced previously buoyant UK new car demand. Home market sales in the last quarter of 1952 were only 15% of the sales in the 3 preceding quarters. In mid-September, the board advised shareholders that the forecast break in production was unavoidable, and that it might prove to be a considerable duration. Having regard to this possibility, negotiations extended to suitable alternative work which would keep the factory reasonably employed. It also advised that the difficulty in arranging supplies of new bodies would unfortunately postpone the production of the new range of commercial vehicles and the estate car, which were fully tooled up. The business appeared to be running out of working capital and car production ceased. In July 1954, it was announced that Jowett Cars Limited would sell its main factory at Idle to International Harvester, excluding plant and equipment needed for the service and spares department. A note was added by the Times that Jowett Cars had run into difficulties the previous year, which 1953, following the acquisition of the motor body suppliers Fisher and Ludlow by BMC, completed in September 1953. It is now stated that since the company ceased manufacturing Javelin and Bradford vehicles, it had not been found possible to keep the main factory operating at an economical level. However, Jowett Cars Limited reported a small profit for the financial year. At the 35th Annual General Meeting in August 1954, the chairman advised that profound regret of the board and all associated with the company, including the users of some 65,000 vehicles which had been made since the year of 1946, that the company would be placed into voluntary liquidation. Ultimately, shareholders received back rather more than their nominal share. That process was completed in mid-1955. To the present day, there are some 8 Jowett Club regions in the UK and very robust Australian and New Zealand groups that exist to support and promote the Jowett. Members gather with their cars for sectional meetings and once a year for a national rally. Members and their cars from the USA and Europe have attended. Now on to the famous owners of the Jowett Jupiter. John Blashford Snell, who was an explorer, Don Cockle, who was a boxer, Peter Craven, who was a speedway ace, Ernest Dudley, author of crime fiction, Martin Fry, lead singer of ABC, Red Skelton, comedian, John Surtees, racing driver, Peter Ustinov, actor and dramatist. Budger Rogers, Bedford rugby captain and Ingham player who had 34 caps, and Bill Locke, father of comedian Trevor Locke. The name of Trevor's band, Jowett, was influenced by the car. So there we go, everyone. That is the end of another video. As always, I'd like to thank you for listening, supporting the channel. Please remember to like, share and subscribe. I'm now going to give my jaw a rest because that's taken nearly 15 minutes. And I will see you in the next video. And until then, take care. Thank you.